He didn't even look at me when he said it, just kept scrolling on that stupid little screen like I was a malfunctioning light switch. You're done here, effective immediately. That was Grady March, Arcadia's shiny new facilities director with a neck still red from whatever prep school he crawled out of. He had 2 security guards behind him and a third-party contractor sweating through a logoed polo shirt. Grady didn't know how to spell HVAC, let alone what would happen if someone yanked the system root without a clean credential handshake. I stood next to the diagnostics terminal I'd built myself, watching Building 3's temperature curve drift into the green, efficient, optimized, stable. That morning alone, I'd caught a silent fault in the emergency damper array, flagged a misfire in the CO2 override, and patched it before anyone even noticed. But sure, done. By the way, if you've made it this far and you're enjoying the story, do us a solid. Hit that like button and subscribe. It keeps these stories alive, and honestly, it means a lot to the team behind the scenes. Most people listen without subscribing, but every single click helps us keep digging up these tales. All right, back to it. The truth is, I wasn't even surprised. Not really. Grady was exactly the kind of smug, back-patting leadership these PE firms love. Branded socks, wireless plans, everything moved to the cloud, and God forbid anyone knows more than he does. His first week, he'd held a town hall about digitally empowering legacy workflows, which basically meant gutting anyone who could still read a wiring diagram. He wanted clean dashboards, fast onboarding, no weird old systems that required real knowledge. Problem was, I wasn't a relic. I was the system. Arcadia had grown around the infrastructure I designed. Entry logs, fire suppression redundancy, air exchange balancing across 14 structures. Most of it was proprietary code built in-house under my own consulting entity, Boreline Systems. Long before they'd started flirting with equity groups. The firmware kernel, custom. The fallback shell, tied to my biometric and protected under Clause 18C of the original infrastructure charter. Clause 18C. God, I love that clause. Drafted by the original founder, Harold Lynn, back when Arcadia was still a pipe and steel operation, it guaranteed that any employee or contractor holding root-level override access couldn't be dismissed or replaced without unanimous trustee approval and a documented credential transition. No approval? No handover? The system stays locked. Grady never read it. I did. I helped write it. For over 12 years, I'd made Arcadia hum. Didn't need a corner office. Didn't want one. Give me a black coffee, an analog gauge, and some server logs, and I could keep this place breathing through blizzards and blackouts. I was the one the board called when lightning took out the main transfer at Building 6. When the HVAC compressors failed during that 109-degree July heat wave. I had Building 8's systems rerouted in 4 minutes flat. Never once asked for a bonus. And Grady March? His first week, he unplugged the backup node to charge his damn phone. I warned him once. Nicely. Some systems aren't designed to be migrated on a whim. He laughed. Then maybe we should redesign the systems. You can't redesign physics, Grady, or legally binding infrastructure sovereignty. Still, I let him play. Let them bring in the Orion Tech guys with their slick sneakers and redundant Slack channels. Let them set up cloud clusters that failed to interface with even the most basic of our grounding controls. Watched as the third-party dashboard choked on the encryption handoff. I logged every attempt. Noted every denial. Quietly updated the board folder that lived on the trustee share. And I waited. I don't play hero, I don't do drama, I log events, I patch faults. I follow the rules. Grady thought I was just another holdover. That's the mistake, isn't it? People like him think experience is baggage, think quiet is weak, but they forget when the lights stay on, someone's keeping the voltage steady, someone invisible, someone like me. And when you cut that person loose, you better hope they didn't wire the fuse box. It started with the whiteboards. One morning, I walked into the ops room and every board was covered in buzzwords. Cloud native, smart redundancy, real-time observability. No metrics, no thermal curves, no actual load balancing strategy. Just diagrams that looked like a toddler's spaghetti dinner had collided with a TED Talk. That was when I knew. Grady's IT crew had taken the bait. They called it Phase 1. Full migration to their Orion Tech suite. Supposedly the holy grail of building ops, everything run through a sleek little dashboard with predictive alerts, AI-driven energy consumption adjustments, and, I kid you not, mood lighting preferences for improved morale. These boys thought smart bulbs could replace 40 years of thermodynamic engineering. Grady strutted around like he'd just brokered a peace treaty. "No more clunky legacy systems," he said, waving his hand at my terminal. "Let's make this place modern." Modern. As if the infrastructure holding Arcadia together was just an Etsy project I'd pasted together with baling wire and coffee grinds. Never mind that their cloud suite couldn't handshake with our embedded kernel. Never mind that the firmware authorization depended on a non-portable biometric hash, a precaution I implemented after a 2014 incident when a contractor tried to run a rogue update without checking voltage thresholds. We almost lost 3 labs that day. I flagged the issue. Twice. Documented it in the transition portal, pinned it to the shared team chat, got a thumbs up emoji and total silence. They didn't even test in Sandbox before pushing live. So when the internal notice came, subject line, operational realignment notification, I didn't blink. HR speak for "we're cutting you loose." 3 lines long. No meeting, no thank you. Just, "your services are no longer required. Please turn in your badge by Friday." Cute. Because what none of them realized was that under Arcadia's own infrastructure charter, the master control shell, the deepest layer of the system stack, wasn't actually theirs. It wasn't even Arcadia's, technically. Clause 18C, tucked right under a section no one ever reads unless a lawyer gets paid by the hour, designated critical override systems as privately licensed assets when developed under third-party consulting contracts. Like mine, Borline Systems held that license, and it wasn't transferable without signature from all 4 trustees and a formal credential escrow ceremony, which, shocker, never happened. But more than that, the biometric anchor was me, my exact ocular signature, no duplicate, no override, no generic admin fallback. If you tried to force it, the system would trigger a lockdown cascade and wipe transient admin routes, a digital immune system, built to survive idiots. And now, here they were, trying to plug in a cloud dashboard that couldn't even recognize the heartbeat of the core system. They didn't even know what they were missing. They mapped the easy layers, door lock controls, HVAC scheduling, parking garage sensors. But the crown jewel, the override nexus, the one I'd buried under a nested protocol with quantum clock dependencies, that node was invisible unless you knew exactly how to knock. You'd think someone in facilities would understand why elevators shouldn't be managed through Wi-Fi, why server cooling arrays should never be auto-balanced by a script that doesn't know the difference between kilojoules and Celsius. But no, they chased shiny, chased cheap. I watched them for 3 days, trying to ping systems, wondering why certain nodes blinked green but refused to respond, watching Grady grow redder and redder each time his dashboard told him the building was partially online. And through it all, I sat quietly, still had access, still had root logs piped to my secure server. Every failed attempt got logged, every denial, every heat spike, every lighting mismatch, every elevator fault caused by a broken mapping variable in their API wrapper. They thought I was gone. But the system still knew who built it, still remembered who told it how to breathe. And when you try to evict the lungs from the body, well, don't act surprised when it starts suffocating. I was halfway through logging thermal drift reports for Building 5's northeast quadrant when I saw them coming through the lower glass hallway. Grady, the 2 security guys from campus services, and 1 Orion Tech contractor with a wheeled case he looked too nervous to carry, the kind of walk that screams, "Let's make a point." Grady didn't even try to hide it. Tan blazer, smug posture, holding his phone like it was the warrant for my execution. They didn't knock. Grady just walked straight in and said it like he was reading a text aloud. Effective immediately, turn over the master building controls. Not, please. Not, do you have a moment? Just the same bored tone he used when he asked the vending machine guy to switch Diet Coke for Celsius. I kept my hands on the terminal a second longer. Saved the diagnostic report. Logged out. I could hear the Orion Tech guy already fumbling with his tablet, getting ready to plug in and take over, assuming this would be clean, seamless, push-button easy. I looked up at Grady and said it flat. no heat in my voice. I'm really sorry, but I can't do that. That made him blink. Not because he didn't hear me, but because I didn't jump. I didn't stand or cry or argue. Just stayed exactly where I was, with my screens powered down and my posture straight. He tried again, with that little smirk that men like him save for when women don't do what they're told. You're no longer employed here. I don't think you understand. I do, I said, calm as ever. Better than you. Then I reached down, unhooked the lanyard from my belt loop, and held it up like an offering. But I didn't give it to him. I stepped past him. He flinched, which was satisfying, and handed it to the man behind him. Compliance. He hadn't noticed him, but I sure had. Mid-50s. Wore his badge like it meant something. Looked up when I said, "You're the trustee liaison, right?" His eyes narrowed. "Yes." "Then you'll want to verify the credential tag." I turned and walked to the door. Didn't even wait for them to catch up. Behind me, I heard the compliance officer's voice shift slightly. Not loud, not panicked, but different. "This ID is tagged under Clause 18C jurisdiction." Silence. I kept walking down the hallway like it was any other Tuesday, like the building wasn't already shifting beneath them, like every credential attempt Grady's team had logged that week wasn't about to be retroactively flagged and reported to trustees as unauthorized interface attempts. He hadn't checked. Not the badge registry, not the charter clause index, not the license lineage tied to the control shell. Just barged in like the world would rearrange itself around his ego. The compliance guy caught up to me near the stairwell. He didn't say much, just asked one question. "Is this going to trigger?" "Already has," I said. He nodded once. No panic, no scolding, just understanding. That was a man who'd read the infrastructure charter, who knew what happens when root access isn't respectfully transitioned. Back in the control room, Grady was still frozen, still holding that phone like it might explain something if he stared long enough. I never turned around to watch, didn't need to. I'd seen this moment play out months ago, not in a vision, not in a dream, in planning. In risk mitigation protocols. In a clause buried 39 pages deep in a policy packet no one had read since Harold Lynn signed it with a fountain pen. They wanted to push me out quietly, thought I'd melt away like outdated firmware. But when you're the anchor that holds the system in place, you don't melt, you don't vanish, you pull everything else down with you, and if they're lucky, you let them up for air. Once. Maybe. He stared at the badge like it had insulted him personally. The compliance officer, Frank, I think his name was, had a crease forming between his eyebrows, the kind men get when they're about to explain to someone why they've just blown off their own foot. He looked at Grady, then back at the lanyard, then flipped it to scan the embedded chip. A soft beep confirmed the tag, and then Frank sighed. Not dramatically, just resigned. Like he'd seen this movie before and already knew how it ended. "Sir," he said, voice neutral but heavy, "this ID is tagged under Clause 18C jurisdiction." Grady blinked. What? Frank didn't repeat himself. Just handed over a laminated packet from the compliance folio and tapped the clause heading near the bottom. I could hear the plastic of the Orion Tech case creak as the poor kid holding it shifted nervously, probably realizing this wasn't going to be the smooth transition they'd all been promised. Clause 18C. The Infrastructure Sovereignty Clause. I remember writing it up with Harold Lynn in the old boardroom back before Arcadia had a single lab on campus. He'd called it the Iron Ring, a way to make sure nobody from corporate could rip out the backbone of his operation without knowing how it was wired. Back then, everything was hand-coded and hand-verified. You didn't just unplug and hope for the best. You respected the roots. The clause made it legally impossible to remove any personnel with root-level override access, without unanimous consent from all four standing trustees and a completed credential transition ceremony, filed with infrastructure compliance. Grady had neither, which meant, the moment he issued that termination directive, he didn't just try to fire me, he tripped a fail-safe. Frank stepped closer to the control terminal, tapped the screen. A red message blinked at the bottom corner. Unauthorized termination attempt detected. Infrastructure Protocol 18C triggered. A timestamp. A location. A list of automatic responses queued and in progress. Grady glanced between us, still clinging to his phone like it might tell him what to say. This This doesn't make sense. I was told we had full authority to restructure ops. Frank didn't flinch. You may have authority, sir, but not override sovereignty. You skipped the credential de-escalation. No transfer, no escrow, no clearance signatures. That's a breach. The word breach landed hard. I watched the Orion Tech contractor's eyes widen as he looked down at his device. His hands moved fast, trying to bring up a remote access panel, but the interface just blinked access denied over and over like a school bell ringing failure. I didn't say a word. Didn't have to. I'd spoken months ago when I built the fallback shell, when I embedded the hardware handshake and made damn sure it couldn't be spoofed. I'd warned them, documented everything, and now it was happening in real time. Across the campus, systems began responding to the event. Emergency fallback modes initiated, locks shifted to containment status, non-essential subsystems began to wind down automatically, lighting reset to grid-safe mode, power consumption flattened. On paper, it would look like a coordinated response to a threat, because it was. But the threat wasn't external. It was Grady. Frank's phone buzzed. He read the message and didn't even try to hide the grim satisfaction. Trustees have been alerted. Legal escalation is in process. Grady looked like he was about to argue, but nothing came out. I watched his mouth open and close like a goldfish dropped into a shark tank. He'd been so sure, so arrogant, and now the building itself was shutting him out. I leaned against the door frame. Clause 18C exists for a reason. You never bothered to ask why. He turned toward me, finally, his eyes full of something between panic and disbelief. You can't hold the entire campus hostage just because... I didn't hold anything, Grady. You tripped it. All I did was follow protocol. The irony, of course, was that I never built the failsafe to protect myself. It wasn't ego. It was design. Systems this complex need continuity, need respect. You don't just tear out the lungs and expect the body to breathe. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to throw papers or storm out or beg for recognition. All I needed was the one clause I'd written when I still believed Arcadia wanted to last longer than its quarterly report. And now that clause was alive, active, watching, responding. Grady had pulled the pin, and the building was exhaling. He tapped the screen like it was a mistake. Like if he just refreshed one more time, the building would politely comply. The Orion Tech contractor, kid couldn't have been more than 26 max, started with quick swipes, then slowed when nothing moved. Then his face changed. That shift from "oh weird" to "oh no." You could see it in his posture. Shoulders tensed, thumbs hovering above the screen like they were asking for divine intervention. He muttered. System's not responding. Grady didn't react right away, just stood there, frozen, watching the flicker of a smart panel on the wall cycle from green to amber to deep, angry red. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Then it started. Building 2's corridor lights snapped off in clean sequence, left to right like a wave. In Building 3, the HVAC system gave one final shudder and dropped into maintenance mode. I knew it was happening before they did. I felt it in the rhythm. When you live with a system long enough, it becomes instinctual. You feel the change in air pressure before the gauges report it, the temperature drop, the buzz in the walls, something ancient, mechanical, loyal. Building 4's lab doors sealed, deadlock clamps engaged. A row of motion sensors blinked red, signaling no authorized personnel detected inside. All quiet, all tight. And then, Building 5 triggered the full cascade. Server Room Alpha went dark. Not off, just sealed. Fallback Protocol 3B activated, isolating core systems from remote tampering. Cooling dropped to minimal capacity to preserve memory units. 2 backup drives spun into redundancy sync. Emergency generators kicked over into fuel-saving cycle. The control shell was alive. It was thinking. It was protecting itself, because that's what I taught it to do. Back in the control room, the Orion Tech contractor looked up, pale. It says, "Unsecured transition. It's locking us out." Frank, the compliance officer, didn't even flinch. He'd seen the warning flash on his tablet 5 seconds earlier. Trustees have been pinged. Grady, bless his little leather loafers, still thought this was reversible. "Reboot it," he snapped. The contractor shook his head. I can't even get shell access. It's like someone buried a root protocol that overrides the dashboard. I didn't speak. I didn't smile either. This wasn't a victory lap, it was a design test, and the building had passed. The message pulsed again in every facility node, every dashboard screen that still had power. Unsecured transition, detected authority, escrow violation, clause 18C, escalation active. The system was built to assume danger if credentials changed hands without an escrow handshake. Not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I knew this place, its complexity, its interlocks, its fail points. And I knew that the biggest threat to any system isn't fire or water or power loss. It's arrogance. And now arrogance was watching helplessly as the lights dimmed on a $200 million campus. Grady finally looked at me. That's when it clicked for him. The way his eyes shifted, not angry, not accusatory, but scared. Not of me, of what I knew that he didn't, that he never cared to learn. You licensed it, he said, the words flat, barely a whisper. I nodded. 3 years ago, under Borline Systems, Capital Improvement Initiative, your signature isn't on the project folder. But it's ours, he said, flailing now. We paid for it. Arcadia owns the infrastructure. Arcadia owns the walls, I said. You never bought the keys. Frank cleared his throat. To be precise, the firmware kernel was delivered under contract. Licensing was retained. Any changes require written consent from the originator. That's standard. The room went silent, except for the occasional alert pinging from the Orion Tech dashboard. One by one, their control layers were going dark, and I just stood there, still. Not smug, not vengeful, still. Because this wasn't revenge, it wasn't a trap, it was accountability written in code and soldered into steel. A reminder that systems don't care about job titles or meetings or digital whiteboards. They care about continuity. They care about logic. They care about being respected. And Grady? He walked into the heart of something sacred and tried to kick down the door. Now the door was closing behind him, one lock at a time. They showed up right on time. 2 black SUVs, federal plates, laminated credentials in matching leather folders. FDA inspection teams don't arrive casually. They arrive like storms, planned, deliberate, and on a clock. This one had been in the works for 6 weeks. Arcadia's new pharma wing was up for critical systems validation, environmental control, containment thresholds, emergency purge sequencing. Without that approval, the lab couldn't accept partner contracts or begin manufacturing. Every hour mattered. But the moment they pulled up to the security gate, everything stopped. I was already gone from campus by then. Sitting in the diner off Route 9, sipping the same bad coffee I'd been drinking since Arcadia, was just 3 buildings and a muddy parking lot. My phone buzzed once. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I already knew. The lockdown had triggered automatically, exactly as written. Invalid credential transfer plus attempted override. Hash and full site freeze. That meant no lab access, no environmental readings, no HVSE test reports. All systems sealed under protective fallback until legal cleared the transition or the original credential holder reauthorized access. And that holder was me. Across town, the FDA inspectors waited in their SUVs for 13 minutes before even being allowed to step out. Security couldn't let them through without clearance from facilities. But facilities was locked out. Orion Tech's contractor tried to escalate through his dashboard, got nothing. Every node flashed the same message. Master access suspended. Escrow breach detected. Clause 18C in active enforcement mode. Awaiting legal response. Within the hour, Arcadia's legal team was swamped. Dozens of emails, calls, panic. The site couldn't function. The inspection was canceled. And every operational lead who had promised smooth oversight now had to explain why the FDA was sitting in a motel conference room with a clipboard and no building to walk through. But I wasn't panicked. Because 36 hours earlier, I'd filed my incident statement through Borline Systems' secure portal. Logged. Time-stamped. Attached to the original licensing contract signed by Arcadia during the capital improvement phase 3 years prior. It detailed the non-transferability of the firmware kernel, the biometric lockout policy, and the failsafe triggers under unverified access attempts. It also included a clear warning, one Grady had seen, even initialed, that any unauthorized root-level credential change would result in full system lockdown under liability exclusion terms. And now, here we were. Trustees were pulled from meetings. Phones rang in offices that hadn't seen sunlight in a decade. Grady's name was mentioned in every call, every email, every legal whisper that started with, "How did this happen?" and ended with, "Where the hell is she now?" I was right where I needed to be. Still, composed, documented. You don't need to yell when the evidence does it for you. Someone from legal finally called. Not to argue, just to confirm. "Did you submit this document at 8:42 p.m. on the 12th? "Yes," I said, not bothering to ask who was on the line. "And the clause, 18C, it's still enforceable?" "It's built into the firmware. You'll need my consent and a credential escrow to lift it." A pause. A breath. Noted. They knew. Knew it wasn't a bluff. Knew this wasn't about pride or rebellion or revenge. It was about design. About understanding that when you build something meant to keep people safe, you don't hand the keys to someone who thinks walls are just line items and HVAC is set it and forget it. Grady had tried to delete a function he didn't understand. Now he was watching that function wrap around the building like a firewall made of law, logic, and legacy. The FDA left by 3:20 p.m. Their team lead logged a formal delay due to access obstruction and credential instability. That's the kind of language that lives in audit reports forever. The kind of language that makes investors nervous. The kind that sends boardrooms into cold sweats. I stirred my coffee, watched the sun start to dip behind the diner's filthy blinds. There'd be another meeting. But this one wouldn't be about my dismissal. It would be about the cost of ignoring what holds a place together. The price of assuming the system is just wires and lights and dashboards. They wanted clean handovers, fast replacements, efficiency in neat little graphs. What they got was silence, escalation, and the kind of accountability you can't unplug. And I hadn't even raised my voice. They didn't even let him pack his own office. By Thursday morning, facilities was dead quiet. Not the kind of quiet where people were working hard. The kind where no one knew which door still had a working lock and everyone was afraid to touch a switch. Word had spread like coolant through a cracked valve. Grady March had been placed on administrative leave. Walked out before his second payroll cycle had even cleared. The official email came from HR. Pending internal review of procedural gaps in credential oversight. You could practically hear the legal team behind every word, massaging liability into bland professionalism. But everyone knew what it meant. You don't trigger a lockdown on a federally scheduled pharma inspection and walk away with your blazers still pressed. Off the record? The trustees were livid. I wasn't in the room, obviously. I was never in those rooms. But I know how they talk when reputations are on the line. Grady's name got pinned to every failure they were too proud to admit they'd signed off on. His cloud migration pitch, his fault. The missed contract red lines, his oversight, the attempt to cut a licensed system from its original architect without transition documentation, that one they didn't even try to spin. Clause 18C had done exactly what it was supposed to do. Legal confirmed it again, twice. The clause was still active. My badge, according to the internal system audit, was tagged as a non-transferable, irreversible anchor, meaning I could not be removed unless the full transition process was executed, which it wasn't. And it gets better. The clause also contained a neat little section, 3.4b, that indemnified me from any termination attempt that occurred without that process. No hearings, no appeals, just baked-in legal shelter backed by the licensing contract. No one could touch me, not without cracking the system itself. I didn't call the press, didn't do interviews, didn't even show up to the building. I just sent one thing, a remediation invoice, $4.2 million itemized. Line 1, controlled systems deactivation, 1.2 motors line. 2, firmware reprogramming to trustee-owned kernel, 1.5 mer line. 3, credential escrow reconfiguration, 900K line. 4, legal compliance review and clause satisfaction, 600K subtotal, respect. Payable to Boreline Systems, net 30. I didn't include emotion, no commentary, no footnotes. Just a simple cover message. per licensing agreement filed with Arcadia Facilities under contract ID AUX 4187. Please find attached the remediation invoice following unauthorized termination attempt and breach-triggered lockdown sequence. All logs and compliance documentation enclosed. I remain available to facilitate transition. Simple. Professional. Cold enough to hold its own against boardroom AC. The email thread got quiet after that. Well, not quiet, just quieter in my direction. I heard through a friend in compliance that the trustees had spent 4 hours reviewing the original contract, trying to find a way to claw back control without paying. There wasn't one. The signature page was clear. My name, Harold Lynn's initials, and a notary stamp from a day in June no one remembered until now. They tried to find a workaround. Of course they did. But the more they pulled, the more they saw how many other systems were woven into the kernel. Emergency relays, fire suppression logic, air filtration redundancies for the biolabs. It would have cost them double just to build a new one from scratch. Cheaper to pay me. Grady's desk sat untouched for 2 days, then someone quietly wheeled it into storage. No press release, no LinkedIn farewell post. Just a hollow echo where his swagger used to be. Someone told me they changed his security code that weekend and scrubbed his profile from the Arcadia site. His name vanished from the org chart like a typo corrected in silence. Me, I didn't press charges, didn't ask for an apology. I just kept the invoice open. Let the clock run. Because sometimes the best kind of power is the kind that doesn't shout. It just bills you for the damage. The next trustee session happened behind closed doors, as always. No recordings, no minutes that would ever see daylight. But I didn't need to be in the room to know how it went. The signs were everywhere. My inbox, once silent, suddenly filled with requests for transition clarification and vendor legacy logic review, the polite version of a white flag. They approved a new access protocol. They had to. But instead of wiping me out of the system like Grady wanted, they took a different route, one driven by legal reality, not personal comfort. They issued a passive credential to Borline Systems. Not to me, personally. To my LLC. It wasn't editable. Couldn't be revoked without my sign-off. It sat at the very bottom of every system dashboard, beneath temperature graphs, beneath entry logs, beneath emergency override status. One thin gray line, passive admin credential active, license holder, Borline Systems. It didn't control anything, but it couldn't be deleted, it just existed. A ghost embedded in the system, quiet, permanent, and watching. Grady's name, on the other hand, vanished by the following Monday. Wiped clean, no trace on the internal dashboards. His user ID archived, then overwritten. The facilities director tag quietly reassigned to a placeholder admin profile, pending new hire approval. His Arcadia email bounced back with a generic auto-reply, no longer with the company. His official exit memo, the one quietly sent to department heads, blamed conflicting priorities and vision misalignment. But the contractor circles knew better. It started with a Slack thread, a screenshot of a system alert timestamped the day of the FDA lockout, red text over black, escrow breach, lockdown active. The caption read, "Who the hell designed a building to ghost its own director?" The thread made quiet rounds, shared in DMs, passed around back-end ops groups, even showed up in a facilities contractor newsletter out of Denver, buried in a think piece titled Legacy Systems and the Myth of Disposable Staff. They called it the Arcadia Incident, but the punchline was the same in every version. Some guy thought he could erase the person who built the foundation. The building disagreed. Meanwhile, I kept my distance, didn't return calls, didn't reply to the dozen consulting firms who suddenly wanted to learn more about clause-based infrastructure modeling. I let the passive credential do all the talking, because when your name lives inside a system's bones, you don't need to shout to be heard. People who've never touched code think deletion is easy. Click and poof. Like names are just data, and data isn't stubborn. But any real engineer knows it's never that clean. Systems remember. They hold on to patterns, residual logic, timestamps you can't scrub. And sometimes the presence of an absence says more than any bold name ever could. Grady learned that the hard way. His credentials were erased, his projects reassigned. but the system still whispered in my voice, and every time someone accessed a control panel, ran a thermal sink, adjusted a relay or a purge timer, they saw it. That little line, bore line systems, no controls, no access, just presence, the kind you don't erase, the kind that built the building in the first place. It happens like clockwork. First week of December, every year. Somewhere between 3 and 3:15 p.m., during the annual fire drill recertification sweep, a soft, almost imperceptible ping hits my inbox. It doesn't come from Arcadia's email servers, not anymore. It's routed through the legacy logic controller tied to the 7th floor's emergency ventilation cluster. The system calls it a heartbeat check, just a little green flag in a sea of automated routines. Legacy credential, active. Override integrity, intact. Source, Boreline Systems. No one sends it. The building does. Every year, I think I might ignore it. Every year, I watch the green flag blink on the dashboard I still keep archived in a secure local folder. I never reply. Never reach back out. Don't need to. It's not a message that needs a response. It's a reminder that despite the promotions, restructures, firings, migrations, and men in wireless headsets who think dashboards mean dominion, the system still knows me. Not as a user, not as an employee, as its architect. People come and go. I did too, quietly, without an exit interview or a LinkedIn post, without a framed plaque or farewell cupcakes in the break room. But systems hold on to design. They remember the logic, the fingerprints in the firmware, the way data breathes when it's allowed to do more than just report up a chain of command. I haven't stepped foot in Arcadia in almost a year now. The parking lot's been repaved. I heard they added a rooftop greenhouse, PR fluff for some sustainability grant. But the core of it, the veins and lungs and synaptic nerves of the place, they haven't changed. They can't change, not without rebuilding from scratch. And rebuilding means time, means trust, means understanding the blueprint written in someone else's silence. So they left it, wrapped it in new dashboards, slapped on new sensors, rebranded the shell. But the heartbeat is still mine. They could have honored it, worked with it, transitioned respectfully. Instead, they tried to gut it. And now, every December, I get my own quiet little audit. A building checking in with its ghost, not for permission, just to say, still here, still breathing, still built on your name. There's something deeply satisfying in that. Not revenge, not victory, recognition. The kind that doesn't show up on org charts or performance reviews. The kind that doesn't vanish when someone younger, louder, or cheaper shows up with a PowerPoint and a mandate. That light on the 7th floor. It'll keep blinking long after Grady's name is forgotten, long after Boreline Systems is absorbed, retired, renamed. Because some things outlast noise. Some things were built not to be noticed, but to endure. And endurance? That's the legacy no one can erase.